We're talking about Irv Smith expectations. I got some free agent signing suggestions and shoot, Chevy Chase opinions. Why not? It's Twitter Tuesday here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at LukeBraunNFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. Today on the show is Twitter Tuesday, which of course means I'm taking all your questions. I asked you for stupid questions, and boy, you delivered on some stupid ones, and we will get to those later in the show. But first, we'll take some serious topics. The first one I'm going to answer today. By the way, if you ever have a question for me, you can always send it to me at Locked On Vikings on Twitter, at Luke Braun NFL on Twitter. You can send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com, or you can fill out the Google form in the show notes. The first one comes from Kevin Wigg, who says, what kind of season do you think Irv Smith could have this season? Top 5. So top 5 for tight ends, using like fantasy as a proxy, which is a decent proxy for production, for like raw production stat stuff. It's a fine composite of like yards and touchdowns, right? That's probably a lot to ask, but at the same time, like, who are the top 5 tight ends in fantasy? It's like, it's going to be, the usual suspects, the Travis Kelce's and stuff. And then kind of who else? I guess you have like Kittle, you have Kyle Pitts and Mark Andrews, I suppose, and Darren Waller, but some of those guys have some uncertainties around them, but like so does Irv Smith. He's coming off an injury right now, at least on like Fantasy Pros. Irv Smith is tight end 14, so I guess that would be the expectation. But for me, I do think he can outdo that. I'm really high on Irv Smith. It's just that he was so insanely good at camp last year. And then he got hurt, and that was such a big bummer. But like, my goodness, he was killing it in camp last year. So I don't know, maybe that injury, maybe that was like lightning in a bottle and he wasn't really going to be that good or whatever. There's still plenty of unknowns. Like, you're not going to bet your mortgage on it or anything like that. But I do think he could probably crack the top 10 if he has a good year, or if he has the year that I think he can be a top 10 tight end for sure. And then it's also like, what's his usage? What does Kevin O'Connell want out of a tight end? Those are questions I don't know if we can necessarily answer until we see him actually play. Cho asks, if the Vikings win the Super Bowl and Kirk Cousins wins MVP, do you think they will be able to find the money to re-sign him? This is an absurd question, but it's an exact copy of a question asked a few years ago on Chicago Sports Radio when I lived there about Mitch Trubisky. So that rules. Love tell me, please send me your very sad memories of what Bears fans were doing to cope with Mitch Trubisky and all of the various things that have been wrong with them over the years. But for Kirk Cousins, the answer is an emphatic yes. If he wins and it's Super Bowl MVP and they win all pretense goes out the window, right? Then you're backing up the Brinks truck, and Kirk Cousins can have literally anything he wants, and you're cutting whoever you want to keep him there if you win a Super Bowl. And it might be the Joe Flacco mistake, like the way the Ravens did it, and I wouldn't care at all. Like, if he wins a Super Bowl, whatever, you did it. You get all the money. I don't care. So yes, of course they can find that money. How they find that money, it depends on what year you're talking, right? Because if he wins the Super Bowl this year, like if the Vikings like totally exceed expectations and win the Super Bowl, well, he's under contract next year, and they'd be due for an extension, and you would do that. But if he wins the Super Bowl next year and then he's a pending free agent, then it might not be about money at all. It might be a matter of, well, I kind of want to be the reigning Super Bowl MVP and hit the market. That seems like it's going to be more lucrative to me than like a one-team negotiation. So there's a lot of factors that change it, but in the event that the Vikings win the Super Bowl, Kirk Cousins is Super Bowl MVP, and it's not one of those weird situations like Nick Foles where it's like there's a lot more than you going on. Then and even if it was that, like, Kirk Cousins gets to be a Viking for life if he wins the Super Bowl. Like, and we're building a statue. Like, there is absolutely no question about it. Human participant asks, worth kicking the tires on Chris Harris Jr. Maybe. So the Vikings could, I guess, use a little bit more nickel corner. They have Chandon Sullivan, and then like Harrison Hand, I guess, is the next guy, like Nate Hairston. Like, there's not a lot of guys playing nickel corner. I mean, I guess you keep 2 of those, right? Whatever your favorite 2 of those guys are, you keep those on the roster. But like I guess that group could use a little more competition. So sure, but that's an argument kind of for anybody, and Chris Harris sure does fall into that category. But I don't know if he's good anymore. Dan Caduce asks, last year, we ended up not signing Jonah Williams due to a failed physical. Alan Hearns was cut from Miami for the same reason this last season. Can you give me a rundown of what an NFL caliber physical is like? Is it like a turn your head and cough type physical or something more intense? Okay, so if I remember, I swear I have promised so many links in the show notes and forgotten all of them. So yell at me if I forget to put this in the show notes, okay? I will link it in the show notes. There's an article that sort of describes what some teams do. It varies team by team, like specifically, but no, it's a lot more like a physical conditioning test. It's not turn your head and cough. It's like 300 yards of sprints, or it's like lifting challenges and stuff. It's usually like shuttle style. So, run to the 20 and back, then run to the 40 and back, and blah, 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 till you've run 300 yards. And then depending on your position, there's a time limit. That's what a physical is. It's the last time I read what a physical actually is, I remember thinking, I would not be able to pass that. Like, that's not so it's not like, can you walk? It's extremely physically demanding, but if you're in shape to play NFL football, you should have no problem with it. Obviously, I'm not. And that's so if you can't pass that, you're either out of shape or you're too injured. And it's like, if you can't run 300 yards this fast, then you probably aren't in shape to be able to play NFL caliber football safely. It's not a matter of even like, can you play well? It's, can you play safely? Like, if I went out on an NFL football field, that would be a deeply unsafe thing. And you're kind of trying to test that. If you could pick one current Vikings player to revert to their prime and turn injuries off for the next 3 seasons, who would it be? Okay, so if I could turn injuries off for the next 3 seasons and get a player in their prime, I'm pretty sure. So there's a little back and forth underneath this one in the Q&A thread, but I think I agree with whoever said Patrick Peterson in that. Turn back the clock, make him, his 2015, 2016 self, right? His 2017 self, where he was like probably the best corner in the league, and turn injuries off for that. And you just have like a lockdown, man on man. That's so valuable for any defense. It just absolutely, it unlocks the world. It's like the magic skeleton key for a defense. So it's probably that. Some people said Daniil Hunter, which sure, although he is in his, so 27? Like, he's in his prime. But turning off injuries obviously is very enticing. Maybe Zadarius Smith, you could say. But I have a tough time thinking anybody but Patrick Peterson. Mac asks, I'm loving the Vikings history shows this offseason, wanting to learn even more. Is there a book or something else you recommend for some deeper dives into Vikings history? Yes. Okay, so there's a few, and a lot of the stuff that I've talked about on the show is sourced out of those books. There's one, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it behind me. It's called 100 Things Vikings Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. There are books like it for like every NFL team. This one is written by Mark Craig from the Star Tribune. It's fantastic. There's some of his own reporting in there. And it's basically, it'll hit all the broad strokes. It's got a thing about all of the, the Herschel Walker trade and every Super Bowl and, the Jim Marshall wrong way run, like all of the moments in history, and some stories that you definitely don't know, but I will get to some of them. I strongly recommend Carl Kasulki's book. It's just called Kasulki. If you can get your hands on a copy, it's not in print anymore, so it might be a little tough, but if you can get your hands on an old falling apart copy like I have, that one's fantastic. Scott Studwell's book is good. Bud Grant's book is good. Joe Kapp's book is fantastic. Just a lot of biographies. Just search Amazon for them, and you can find stuff like that. Kyle Slaby asks, which offense would score more points in a 2022 season? 2009 Vikings with Clint Kubiak calling plays or 2006 Vikings with Gary Kubiak calling plays? Okay, so my initial instinct was to say, well, Brett Favre would just like totally steamroll Clint Kubiak and it'd just be an awesome offense. But Kyle Slaby said I can't do that. I still probably go with 2009 Vikings offense with Clint Kubiak, because the thing about Kubiak was like his play calls would just like die to cover 2 all the time. It was really rough. Like, it would just totally die to too high coverage. And that was a thing that, like, Kirk Cousins wasn't going to, scramble around and make something happen. Like, that's not who he is. But it is who Brett Favre is. So I think Brett Favre in 2009 probably could have made something out of that Kubiak offense. And the 2006 team, the defense was dope. And it actually made them a respectable team. But the offense was like a pretty big catastrophe. And then, of course, 2007, they draft Adrian Peterson, and that changed a lot for them and really helped them get set up for when Brett Favre came in 2009 to have like a stacked team. Strawyacht asks, who wins a boxing match between Adrian Peterson and Le'Veon Bell? Well, I don't know. But if you want to bet on it, Le'Veon Bell is favored. You can find that Gramble at betonline.net. You can bet on anything. You can bet on whether or not the Vikings or whatever team will win week one, what their win total is, whether they'll make the playoffs, where they'll finish in the division, all sorts of stuff. Or you can just bet on like WNBA or tennis or MLB baseball if you are into that. You can go find all of that. Player props for your weird parlays. You can find their live betting module. You can bet right in the middle of a game. All of it at betonline.net, where the game starts. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. The next one comes from Ragnar's Ghost, who asks, you get to switch places with one fictional character. However, you must both fulfill each other's positions well. Otherwise, the rabbits will scheme to take you both down. Who is it and why? Okay, so if I need somebody to do my job well, that basically is anybody can. I'm a podcaster, all right? Anybody can do this. So like that's not a concern. So I'm looking for someone whose job I can do well. And I choose Adam Scott's character from Party Down. Seems like he lives a very easy life. I can absolutely do his job fine. And also watch Party Down. Everybody just needs to know about Party Down. Watch Party Down. Brandon asks, why not? It's on Stars, but you can probably find it in a number of places anyways. Brandon asks, why not sign some speed and pick up John Ross? I don't know about that one, Chief. He kind of stinks at the sport is what my perception of John Ross is. He's got the speed, but we've learned that lesson the hard way before with, the real one was Troy Williamson. He was fast too. He couldn't catch. I don't think that's John Ross's problem, but he just is not. He just doesn't have a lot of that juice. I don't think he has a complete skill set, I guess. I don't know. I would have to like really go scout him and see like what it is that's been holding him back because he does have insane speed. But my perception of John Ross is that that's kind of all he has, and that's why he hasn't really caught on. Purple Velour asks, what does it take, in your mind, for a player to be considered to be breaking out? Yeah. So, that's a really good question, because I say it a lot. I say, like, well, I think he already broke out, right? Let's go back to Irv Smith. I think Irv Smith breaks out this season, and I think it's more of, like, becomes really good. It's like that's all I can say. Like I know that's like a really nebulous thing, and what's the line, and what does really good mean, and all that. But it's somebody who reaches the ceiling they were supposed to reach and becomes a genuine asset. Maybe that's it. They become like KJ Osborne. I think he had a breakout season last year. He wasn't a superstar. He wasn't a wide receiver 1. He was wide receiver 3, and he did a really good job at it. But it was kind of a surprise, and he broke out to be who he is. So that's what a breakout season is. And a breakout season we usually talk about as a breakout season is somebody who's like a superstar. Arch asks, if the Vikings were to have a Super Bowl rematch against any of the 4 teams in the near future, which team would you want to play against or hate to play against? Okay, so options here: Chiefs, Raiders, Dolphins, Steelers. The Chiefs obviously would be a nightmare. You don't want to play Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. The Dolphins seem like they're okay. I like their roster. I've talked about it a lot on Locked On NFL. I've gassed up the Dolphins a lot. I do like the way their roster is composed right now. It's just I'm a little hesitant about Tua. So if I'm playing Tua, that's okay. But if they end up with a better quarterback somehow or something, that would be a little bit scarier. But the Raiders are a decent team. I think they're going to get buried in the AFC West, but in the world where they've already made the Super Bowl, I think they're a decently formidable opponent. The Steelers seem like they're in hell. And I don't know, unless Kenny Pickett works out really, really well, they're in a really rough spot. So I think the Steelers are probably the best bet, if not the Dolphins. Chris asks, when the roof collapsed on the Metrodome, do you think they considered just taking the roof parts out and calling it an outdoor stadium? How long do you think this debate lasted? I don't think that was possible. I think the Metrodome was built where that would be like deeply unsafe. That's not going to be a thing. Bradley Knorr asks, which would pose a brighter future long term? The Vikings winning the division at 11-6 because O'Connell turns out to be an elite coach who looks like the next Sean McVay, or getting a top 3 QB in next year's draft, assuming it stays a great class via bad season or trade up. Probably the first one, because look, if we see that Kevin O'Connell's a whiz and he's the next McVay and it's super, super awesome and they go 11-6 and they win the division, I think we would all pretty much be able to agree that, yeah, we're good with Kirk Cousins. Like, if that happens this year, we go 11-6 and win the division. Yeah, no, I have no need to get rid of Kirk Cousins if that happens. I don't think it'll happen, but hey, if I'm wrong, yeah, sure, I'll take the L and say, yep, we're good there. Let's just keep keep running this back then if we're winning 11 games a year and winning divisions. Getting a top 3 quarterback in next year's draft class would be pretty dope, but without, I think I'd rather have the guarantee that the coach is really cool. That's a really big deal. Thomas Sullivan asks, what aspect of Kirk Cousins' game do you believe needs to improve for him to take the next step at quarterback? Okay, yeah, somebody said he needs to pass more often, which is come on, man. If you're a Locked On listener and you're still going the key to winning is passing the ball a lot, I am disappointed, all right? We can do better. Okay, so what I think for Kirk Cousins is the answer pretty much everyone has, and mine's close to it, is plays out of structure, right? And I don't mean improv, scramble drill stuff. That would be super dope, but I just mean peripheral vision, right? If you're looking at the number one option on a play, and behind the number one option, somebody's streaking open on a blown coverage, you need to see that blown coverage. Rather than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5ing it on those kinds of progressions. Some of the progressions are coverage reads and stuff, and it's easier to find a bust there. And he has found busted coverages. But on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they could bust the coverage and he won't see it because he's just doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what he needs. And I think what that will lead to is better peripheral vision, right? Better holistic processing. That will lead to better situational awareness. That will lead to better improvisational ability. It'll lead to being better under pressure. It'll lead to being better in, high leverage situations. Although I always kind of thought that part of the Kirk Cousins thing was a weird little bunk. I don't really like to say it. But all of the critiques of Kirk Cousins kind of stem from that peripheral vision thing, that tunnel vision thing that I talked about last mailbag. So fix that. And I think you genuinely have a top 5 quarterback. Because it's every problem goes away if you fix that. Ryan asks, with AP looking to fight Le'Veon Bell, which former Viking would you like to see fight next, and who would you like to see them fight? The obvious answer here is Brett Favre and Brad Childress. I would like to see the 2 old men fight. Viking Jack asks, why isn't lateral passing a more used skill? The number of plays you could design that would involve a simple pass, then offload to break open is ridiculous. Introducing lateral options after the catch would make every pass into a potential touchdown. Well, yeah, I mean, every play is a potential touchdown, right? That's how you draw it up. But so I think the answer to this is getting good at that takes a lot of time. And you might even remember I told a story not too long ago on this show about grab ass, which was a game that the players would play, but just the offensive and defensive linemen would play grab ass, which was a rugby-esque sort of goof off horse around game that they would do between drills in camp. And they actually got really good at lateraling, and that's why there's so many highlights of Jim Marshall lateraling and stuff. And Randy Moss used to play a very similar game in middle school back in Rand, West Virginia. And if you remember the Mo Williams touchdown, the lateral we've all seen, I mean, yeah, so you can practice and get good at it, but I think orchestrating lateral opportunities adds a layer of complexity that's really hard to train. Getting good at lateraling is going to be really hard to practice, and I don't know if there's enough bandwidth in practice programs to get good at that. You'd have to really, really commit, probably at the cost of fundamental basics of football that you can't really afford to lose. That's probably my answer to that. But hey, look, I mean, people were talking about it in the replies to this. I could see a high school team getting weird about it, and then it starts to sort of snowball up from there. Mishiro asks, is Wyatt Davis dead? Is he in witness protection? I had high hopes for the kids when you drafted him, but I'm just worried he's been kidnapped and being held for ransom by Packers fans. So he is currently at second team left guard, I think is right now his best chance to make the team, but that's what we're talking about. I think he's not working out. He had this has been well documented. He had an injury in training camp last year, and that put him underweight, and then getting back up to weight put him so far behind in terms of just getting used to NFL speed and getting into the right places and getting acclimated that he just was not a viable option at any point. So that's where he was at last season, and then this season, drafting Ed Ingram's a bad omen for him. They signed 2 free agents that were initially competing at right guard. It's not looking great for the kid. But hey, I was excited about him pre-draft too. That would be a huge L for me. He was my second favorite pick of that entire draft. So Yeah, or no, he was my favorite pick of that whole draft. That like my favorite like value pick of that whole draft. So if he just never sees the field and totally flames out by year two, yeah, big whiff on my part. But that's the deal, right? I think it's a lot less fantastical to believe that I was wrong about something than it is to believe that like there's some conspiracy against Wyatt Davis. Kyle asks, why do you take into account past closed off-field incidents into your on-field evaluations? I assume this is a question, a very pointed question, Kyle, about Ed Ingram, which I would like you to point me where I did that because my evaluation of him on the field was actually pretty optimistic. There's an episode of this show that you can go watch, and I made a pretty pretty big deal at the beginning of it to be like, yeah, we're not focusing on that right now. We're going to put it in a bucket and set it aside, and we're going to focus on off field and keep it really separate. So I don't know how you got the idea that I did that, but I definitely didn't. But hey, I wrote a really long article about his off field. I did a really thorough podcast about his on field. Those two are separate things. You can read about whichever one you want. Oscar Milk asks, if the Chargers football anime universe created during schedule release existed, what player would be the main character? I assume you mean of the Vikings, the main character of the Vikings. So we're looking for a protagonist of the Vikings, right? Kirk Cousins absolutely is a comedic side character. He gives me like he would be the Captain Holt if you like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, right? Where he's the main guy in the team because he's the quarterback, but he's not the main character of the story. We're looking for somebody who's a better story. I think Justin Jefferson's the easy one here, right? Especially if it's an anime, that means the main character has to be super OP, right? Where I'm thinking like shonen anime. And that stupid goofball thing is like very Goku, and that's a super shonen trope. So we're going for the like kind of lovable goofball that's like impossibly terrifyingly good at this, and then like all he wants to do is eat rice balls, that kind of thing. I get lots of vibes of that from Justin Jefferson. Robert Ocean asks, if Kevin O'Connell's new offense was a color, what color would it be? Okay, so for me, I'm going to answer this question way more real than you ever knew. So I did a lot of color work in a past life, color correction, and colors in that world all have a lot more purpose. You use colors for moods. You use them to counteract certain things. If you have shots that were in like a fluorescent setting, like in a convention center or something, I did this a lot. You'd have to add magenta, and that's what magenta's like kind of for. And cayenne is for lessening people with red faces. If people were hot or embarrassed or whatever, I would use that. You use that a lot. So colors have very intentional purposes. And so for Kevin O'Connell, like the intentional purpose of his offense and his defense is that illusion of complexity, right? And for that, I would say it's blue or cayenne, because the way you give an illusion of complexity in color is with contrast. Typically, look at like any action movie poster. Typically, you're going to see a lot of turquoise and a lot of orange. Orange appears very naturally in a lot of environments, especially if you're doing narrative. There's going to be explosions, there's skin tones and all that. So there's a lot of orange, and you use turquoise or blue or cayenne, depending on the exact shade, to add the illusion of complexity. So I will say his is those colors. Zach asks, what are your thoughts on Chevy Chase? I've heard some stories. You can look this up. He infamously was a super impossible person to work with on Community, but also so is Dan Harmon. And I've definitely heard stories about both of them independently of each other that corroborate that. So my opinion on Chevy Chase is that dude seems like kind of a jerk. Kurt with 2 C's asks, please rank all 26 letters of the alphabet. No. Joe Cool asks, what is a weird food combo that you enjoy that no one else does? I don't know about weird ones. There's something that I've really liked doing lately, which is just like if I'm feeling lazy, like bagel with cream cheese and then just like a drizzle of Valentina hot sauce on it. I don't know if a lot of people do that with cream cheese in a bagel. Like I feel like cream cheese in a bagel is something that most people just eat like that, but a little hot sauce really brings it out. So I've been enjoying that. I don't know about a weird one, but I will again tell the story of how my sister and I grew up. We saw that one episode of Doug, the kids cartoon Doug, where they made banana pizza, and it was a whole thing. And then we wanted to try it, so we got English muffins. We had like a bottle of Tombstone pizza sauce, and we cut up a banana on it. And it ripped. It was great. And I don't know, sweet and savory. I encourage you all to try it. I loved it as a child. So that was cool. Ruben asks, what Viking is most likely to start Jurassic Park given the money? Okay, my answer to this is going to be very hopeful. It's Cameron Dantzler. I want Cameron Dantzler to be the kind of person with the hubris and disregard for consequence that would start a Jurassic Park. But if it's not Cameron Dantzler, then it's Andrew Booth. I mean, we are looking for that hubris, right? That crazy cornerback confidence that Andrew Booth has. I want it to be Dantzler. And if it's Dantzler, that's great. But if it's not Dantzler, it absolutely is Andrew Booth. Norse Code asks, are you a notary? No? I'm sorry, James. I don't know if there's a joke I'm not getting. No, I'm not a notary. Arif Hassan asks, when are you finally going to effing stop? Right now. Thank y'all so much for listening to this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Make it your first listen. If you want to make it another listen, go check out the Peacock and Williamson podcast or Locked On NFL, where Ross and I ranked quarterbacks based on vibes, and it was very fun. Go check all those things out. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.